So, Eivind, I'm very happy to have this conversation with two people who met online through your channel, Reclaiming the Throne, and through a video where I posted a comment that you responded. So,
Correct.
I'd love to start from there. I'd love to have a small introduction, and especially the way we met, I think, is very serendipitous, as they say. So, on your YouTube channel, you made a video on a great man that we both knew. I knew him personally. I think you knew him mainly through his books, called Robert Moore, who was a Jungian analyst and a man who has inspired me personally and regarding my work in ancient Greece revisited. He became quite well known through a book called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. Robert Moore isolated 4 archetypes, which he called structural archetypes, structural as in a building. So he thought that if you get these 4 right, you have a very good foundation upon which to build. And he became quite famous in the so-called Manosphere, which is a weird combination of pickup artistry and self-development, fitness, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and psychedelics. I think someone like Joe Rogan is like a father figure, whether unintentionally, of this manosphere. And Robert Moore, I think, became very important in the manosphere because these 4 archetypes are all male archetypes: the warrior, the king, the lover, the magician. And I bought this book by way of self-development, and I read it. It was a relatively short book. I would definitely recommend it. And it gave me something. And at the end of this book, it had a little email and address saying, if you're interested in having sessions with Dr. Moore, please contact. And I did that, contacted him very politely, wrote back. We arranged a kind of schedule and a fee of doing essentially therapy with him. And then one day I received an email from a common acquaintance, from a man that Dr. Moore had introduced me to. And it was him who wrote me an email and said, I don't know if you've heard, but the news are that Dr. Moore essentially took his own life in a strange type of double suicide, a suicide pact.
Murder-suicide, yes.
Where it seemed in the beginning that both him and his wife somewhat agreed to take their own life simultaneously, and they were found dead. They were found dead by the police in Chicago, I think, where he was living.
Correct.
And that came as a huge surprise because obviously he was a man I considered a mentor, especially a mentor in life, in self-development, in spiritual affairs. So taking his own life definitely took some of that admiration away. But then I found your video where you were questioning whether that was true or not, and questioning whether his wife had a much more active and perhaps even sinister role to play in this of events. And that is when you invited Robert Moore's niece, who knew him intimately, to give her perspective, and she kind of confirmed your suspicion to some degree. And that is where you read my comment, and I thought of emailing you, and here we are talking about.
I'd like to change the sequence of some of the events, but let me start with how I came to know about Robert Moore initially. It's nice to hear you listen or hear you talk about it, to listen to it, because it's been a big part of my life now for almost a decade, and to just get the synopsis of what's been happening is clarifying and and grounding. And I believe I discovered Robert Moore in 2008 or 9. I, if I recall correctly, I was very loosely associated with the pickup movement back then. I had just come back from a pilgrimage in India where me and some other Buddhists were traveling through the Himalayas, and I was still on the Enlightenment train. And I realized on that trip that I was fleeing from the more the grittier aspects of life, and I had a very unlikely outcome of a Buddhist pilgrimage. That rather than meditate more and becoming more transcendent, I had to get more into the dirt, which I suppose is uh, fairly well aligned with the Vajrayana path that I was on back then. But came back and started to be interested in speaking to women on the street and things like that, because the truth was that I was actually quite lonely in my pursuit for enlightenment. I discovered some of these people who were interested in teaching other men about women, was very loosely affiliated with that movement because I could feel that it wasn't really at the level of integrity that I wanted my mentors to be. But I listened to a podcast where, quite correctly, as you're alluding to yourself, the King Warrior Magician Lover system was presented. And I became very interested. You run a channel called Ancient Greek Revisited, and you have unsurprisingly been drawn to his work. And when I was a little boy, I was consuming Greek mythology like voraciously. I was just reading the works and drawing the characters and the deities and everything. I was really into it. We had a Greek teacher back then who was telling us about Greek mythology. It was very exciting for me. So it kind of brought me back there. It hit something at the soul level inside of me, and I chose to integrate the archetypal work into a project that I had just started, which was called masculinitymovies.com, which happened through a moment of sheer inspiration where I realized that movies were one of the few remaining vessels for some sense of masculine nutrients in our culture. And I started to write about movies and the framework that Dr. Moore, together with his then colleague, Dr. Douglas Gillette, the framework that they had developed was the perfect framework for reviewing and analyzing the patterns of the narrative patterns and the archetypal structures of movies.
Which movies did you like come as the top five, perhaps, on that list?
I had some favorites. I reviewed a wide range of movies, but I think the ones that I liked the most were the more stereotypically masculine ones. I really loved Gladiator, the first one,
Okay.
to review it. Last Samurai, I really enjoyed reviewing.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
I really enjoyed reviewing American Beauty.
Okay. Okay.
And yeah, I think American Beauty was the one I could resonate with the most because of the path that this really sedated, apathetic man goes on to become alive and integrated.
That's very interesting. I saw it at a
Yeah,
time where, yeah, he starts by saying, he's 42. 42 seemed very old at that time. And I remember talking about the movie with a friend years ago now, around the time of Moore's death, actually. And I said, the one thing I hated about this film is that he didn't go all the way. He didn't have sex with that beautiful young girl, who wanted him, and my friend corrected me and said, it's not about that. He reached his goal, which was to grow up, to grow the hell up. It wasn't about scoring. There was like an
Yeah.
image. So even
that's that's
then,
funny. Yeah.
I saw it. I was still in my immature frame of mind. I wanted him to
Yeah,
like
I'm like, okay, yeah, you wanted a number
pick
on the
one for the
list
team.
of
Yeah,
conquered
yeah, yeah,
women.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I was
Yeah,
in similar,
I'd say
similar
that
mind.
is missing the point quite a lot when it comes
Yeah,
to that
yeah,
particular
yeah,
movie.
yeah.
Yeah, but I appreciate you sharing that. Now, I think that was the one movie that became, or the review that became most popular, were the guys around the world, and men said things like, "Just reading this review, I feel like a better man," and so it was an interesting experience. Analyzing these movies, I reached out to Robert Moore because I felt that that was an integrous thing to do. It was important for me to have his blessing. He wrote back to me a really nice email, gave his full blessing as long as I gave him credit, and I chose to do that. And I think it was clear to me from the book that Robert Moore's main gift was mapping out psycho-spiritual structures more than it was mapping out practices for integration. Because I felt that the sort of the little appendix of exercises at the end of the book was very anorexic compared to the feeling of fullness of the
Yes,
mapping.
that's the idea that I got. That he was very much an intellectual. He was
Right.
very much a magician from his four
Mm.
archetypes, very much dominated, and perhaps he would have problems integrating that as well. But I would like to focus on one word that you said there because it's very important. You said blessing, and that is obviously a word that is very big in the men's movement, at least that branch, which is not towards pickup, but it's towards the spiritual maturing, in which Robert Moore was a very important figure. And it's it's not something that most people think. Taking the blessing of an older man just by virtue of him being older in a way, I wouldn't understand it if I didn't have that context. But it's such a beautiful idea, that there is something being passed through the generations and through the male line specifically. Of course, there's many other things that are passing through the female line, but something specific that passing through the male line, it has to do with blessing. Um, and it's so counter the culture that we live in, which has become even more individualistic than it was back when we were talking with Robert Moore. Like it's it feels like the ills of society are what they were back then, 2016, if I remember correctly, times 10 on steroids. And this individual, so let's like, what can we say about this blessing being being blessed by an older man?
Mm. Yeah, I remember Alexander or Robert Bly was referencing this. I think he's a Polish, is he a sociologist? I don't remember his professional title, but his name was Alexander Mitscherlich or
Yes.
something along
Yeah.
those lines. And Robert Bly kept referencing this quote that where there is an insufficient presence of father in a boy's psyche, a hole opens up
Mm.
and it fills with demons.
Mm.
I'm
Yes.
paraphrasing that, but by that we could speak for hours on end on this
Mhm.
one topic, Michael. But I'll riff on it a little bit since you're
Mhm.
inviting. I think first of all the process of growing up for a boy obviously involves coming out of mom, being really connected, bonded, hopefully safely attached to mom. And then at a certain point, you'll have to leave the safe bosom of mother in order to become prepared for the world. and that's of you and I are both fathers, and we know the initial stages of life where they just want mom all the time, and gradually you can just feel that they're reaching out a little bit more from the safety of mother, and they want to experience a little bit of excitement and danger. And then you come in, I come in, and we start to bring guidance so that they can actually build competency in the world without killing themselves in the process, because of course that would be suboptimal. So the idea is that the father, I like to think of it as the father being the square around the mother as a circle and the child as a dot, and you can sort of conceptualize the family structure in that way. And that square, which is us, it's a little bit sharper. It's a little bit, the boundaries are clearer, the edges are sharper. And so there is something about what we represent that is a bit threatening, but also for that boy that is starting to grow, it's a biological longing to become acquainted with that world, right? But if there is no square around mom, then the boy has a feeling of, first of all, being abandoned by the father, which is, of course, biological, but also archetypal. You could say the Holy Father is even further out around the father, biological. But there's also the understanding that, okay, this family unit, maybe it's instinctual, maybe it's like really deep down, but this family unit is not safe because the boundaries, the square isn't around, the guardian of the home isn't there. So at a certain level, there is a vulnerability that steps in, and the boy starts getting really sensitive and quite vulnerable, and he starts to become more obedient to authority, because authority replaces father, so weak men are really, really willing to acquiesce and to bow down to the state, whereas strong men will say what the state is doing is wrong in this particular case. And these days, obviously, that's almost always the case.
Yeah, no,
But
that alone is fascinating to interrupt there, because
yeah,
the state replacing the father is quite something. Because nowadays we're still living in the offshoots, let's say, of the 60s revolution. It's still going on,
yeah,
and I think this kind of woke agenda, as it's called, it's like the utmost extremities of whatever started in the 1960s, for good or bad. It's the more extreme, somewhat deformed version of that. And in that culture, the father as an authority figure is really fought against, and
yes,
the, like, in a way, the 1960s were a revolt against the father as an authority figure, the father representing tradition, the father representing religion, the father representing duty, hard work and obligations. That is what the 1960s, in a way, revolted against, right? But what you're saying, which I found fascinating, is that once you do away with the actual father, both physical and archetypal, you don't get freedom. You get weakness, which is which makes you the ideal prey for an authoritarian state, which we are seeing
absolutely.
all around.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very clear for anyone with eyes to see that that is where we're headed now. In a world of weak men, authoritarian leaders don't really have a viable opposition in the people. And
Mhm.
so, there's been this interesting trend in culture for a long time, at least for the last 20 years, I'd say, where men are being told to be less assertive, less masculine, less violent. And, in more recent years, we should be less toxic. And I think it's pretty obvious that the only people who listen to that are the men who are not already toxic. And so a wildly narcissistic, sociopathic, malevolent man will not listen to social engineering. They don't care about that. So the people who care about that are the men who actually want to be good. So what happens when you indoctrinate the culture in that way is that you do nothing to the malevolent elements of the male population, and you weaken the benevolent elements of the male population.
It's a little bit like gun ownership, in the United States, where if you prohibit ownership of firearms, you don't have criminals because they're going to break your laws anyway. You're just taking the guns away from the people who are good standing citizens, and they would use these weapons to protect law abiding citizens.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a whole different rabbit hole that I have taken a great deal of interest in recently, understanding the origins of democracy in Europe, and that and that, of course, you can trace it back to antiquity. But actually, I'd like to linger there for like 2 minutes because I think it's really, really fascinating. This is a case that's being made in the book The Sovereign Individual, which I recommend that everyone reads. Classic from the 90s that foreshadows what's happening in the world right now, and it presents the backdrop of the feudal Europe, where the crown governs various lordships that have sovereignty to some extent, but are responsible for taxation. So that you have all of these lordships that send money to the crown, and this book makes the case, and I buy that case absolutely 100%. It makes the case that these lords, they had so much sovereignty and a standing military that inside of the nations where these lordships and this particular crown, this particular monarch were operating, the lords, if actually uniting, they would be able to mobilize a greater army than the king himself. And so the king was kept in check by this system because, of course, if the tax burden on the constituents of the country became too great, then they would rebel against their local lords, and the lords didn't want that. And so the argument that is being made in this particular book is that actually democracy was a solution to a problem that wasn't about the people, but it was about the leadership that wanted to be able to extract taxes from the population without having a viable threat within their own borders. And so I think that is like when you consider it from that way, that democracy is created, you get the sort of the mythos of the nation state, the democratic nation states, and people really buy into the nation in a different way than they buy into the crown. And now the people who will not have weapons under this system, because the whole purpose of this system is that there will be a monopoly in violence.
It is quite a rabbit hole. It is, and for people listening, I'd love to go back and finish the other rabbit hole with the late Robert Moore. But to put a little comma there, I agree, and I have found something similar in the books of Alexis de Tocqueville, who travels in the United States in 1820, I think, or around there, beginning of the 19th century. So Alexis de Tocqueville, French aristocrat, born and raised just after the French Revolution, which has effectively destroyed his class, the class of aristocrats in France. And he's born in that very, very early democratic era, and wants, being a philosopher himself, wants to understand, like we do, what is going on, wants to understand this new thing he sees as democracy, and so travels to the United States to see democracy, to witness a people that were not made democratic after being something else, but were born democratic from the get-go. So he wants to see democracy purest, and he travels to the nascent United States. And he writes these 2 volumes the way you did, 2 episodes on Robert Moore, separated by years. So the first one is the most famous, where he actually catalogs what he sees, the democratic processes he finds in the United States with the town hall meetings. But that's the second book that he wrote much later as a reflection of the first. That is what I find more interesting, because he goes into that thing exactly. He goes into how the mindset of a democratic nation is engineered differently. And he finds some very fascinating differences on how a democratic and an aristocratic nations are, down to how they understand history. A democratic nation, an aristocratic nation understands history as being moved by great men. Alexander the Great, Napoleon. It's their
Yes.
will that moves history. And that's what
Yeah.
Tocqueville writes in the 19th
That's
century.
interesting.
In
Yeah.
democratic nations, history is understood as being moved by objective material conditions and random forces. Right? So it's not Alexander the Great, it's the quasi-random development of the Macedonian cavalry, plus the need for, I don't know, I'm making this up, the need for a certain amount of resources that were not found in mainland Greece, plus this, plus that,
Yes.
so very different understandings of reality, in fact, between the aristocratic and the democratic nations. And just to cap what you said off, he gives you this image that is now lost, because after the Enlightenment, we damn the Middle Ages as the age of darkness. And we forget the liberties that were present in certain cases that exceed our own in strange ways we don't even understand. And what you said is definitely one, that in these lordships, everyone lived in a small world. Alexis de Tocqueville has this beautiful image. He said, in the old regime, people lived in a mountainous region. Okay, so imagine a mountainous region where people live in these little pockets, in these valleys. Back in France in the 17th century, you didn't live in France as a Frenchman lives today. You lived
Exactly. Yeah.
in the kingdom of, Normandy. And you knew this
Yeah.
little world, which was a human world. It
So
was
different. It's so
so
different.
different. You knew your
Yeah.
Lord. It was him. He collected your taxes, and you could speak to him directly, and you could raise your complaint to him directly, and you knew who everyone was, and you were someone there. You were, the woodcutter, the poet, the good soldier, the mercenary, the father with a great family. It was a small enough world for everyone to be a someone. Um, and you didn't necessarily see the other little pocket, which was the kingdom of Provence, which
Exactly.
was a copy of yours. The
Yeah.
only people who saw the whole kingdom were, like you said, the king and the emperor. But they were fine because they had the overview. They were fine because they had the overview. They didn't feel small. So what Tocqueville says is that people in these new states that were born after democracy, it leveled that mountainous region. And now everyone lives on the same level with everyone, and everyone feels small and insignificant. Um,
Yes.
just
That
to
is
put a,
so fascinating. Yeah. And
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
different spin on the same that I really appreciate.
exactly. Which is why I said that. It's a different spin on what you just said. But just to put a pause there, take us back to Robert Moore's, just to finish that tangent off, please.
Absolutely. I think, when we talk about the difference between a more feudal society where you know people and you have more of a culture of heroes and things like that, you can understand why the characters of myth and of archetypal theory come actually from the medieval period and not from the modern period. And so actually king, warrior, magician, lover, these are characters that belong really in an Arthurian realm, that kind of imaginal world, which has come to become the bedrock of our own cultural self-conception and imagination in the West. But these archetypes are globally relevant. They're not a Western phenomenon, and so you'll have different spins on these archetypes wherever you are. But I found a great deal of resonance with his work. And I also found meaning and purpose. I enjoyed being able to reach men around the world with my work. And I came to the place, Michael, where I realized, okay, I can do a mean movie review. Give me 10 hours, give me a weekend to write a good movie review, 12 hours, and then I can impact some people. But I don't feel like I can fully contribute to a transformation of their psyche in the way that I was really starting to feel more inspired by. And that's when I created Reclaim Me a Throne, which was an experiment. I took a leap of faith and I created the training as I went based on everything that I'd learned. And it came to be almost a decade of guiding men around the world into some pretty deep places in themselves. And I'm proud to say that it became a very transformational experience for the men who did it. And
And what was the
me and my
structure?
team, we served
What
we
was the
served them
structure
well.
of that course, and how related was it to Robert Moore's work?
Yeah, it was an online training. So the 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 passion that I had for fairy tales and Greek mythology as a young boy was really translated into this training. And so I took these men on a mythical journey through a realm I called the Realm of Forgotten Kings. And so there was a full geographical territory that they traversed with different locales every week.
Okay,
And
interesting.
so
Like a role-playing
the
game almost.
in a rough outline of that particular experience for the men was that they started out in like a place of amnesia and oblivion, to be surrounded by a place of lives of quiet desperation where people don't recognize each other when they walk down the street and everyone is like being pulled into their own misery. This bleak world is kind of the start of this journey. I called that particular place Adagar in the realm. And then I take them through a journey into the underworld. This is still very much in the Jungian territory, which I was very invested in then. I bring in uh, the magician archetype, as of course the magician is the one that brings depth of seeing. I was inspired by the image of Gandalf taking the fellowship through the mines of Moria, and he has the light at the end of his staff to light the way. And so that underworld experience culminates in an encounter with exiled innocence, which comes from this idea that there are places that are traumatized when we are young that become split off from the or the centralizing function of the psyche. And we did various rituals there. We come out of the other end. We travel through a more of a mythical world to a fabled land of lovers and warriors, and we come to a place that I call the Cliff of Kings, where the men heal their relationship with their male lineage, and then we take them to a final ritual of ascending their inner throne. So that was the mythical 13-week experience that I dedicated almost a decade of my life to.
Okay. What was the most challenging part for the majority of men of this journey?
I think the most challenging part for the majority of the men was to take the training seriously from the start.
Mm, mm, mm. It was a paid course.
Yeah, this was it was a fairly premium training towards the end. So there were several tiers you could operate at, but that training went the full spectrum from a humble infancy and becoming a premium training. So it wasn't like it was um, a matter of them just putting like $100 on the table and then easily being able to squander the 3 months we spent together. It was more a sense of, wow, yeah, it's not easy for men to commit in general. They're distracted, they're addicted, there's all kinds of things getting in the way. And so back then I did the mistake that so many facilitators at the start of their career do, is um, to somehow equate the training with me personally. And so that if they didn't get it, I took it kind of as a
Personally.
personal failing on my part. And so I burnt out trying to get everyone in there, because it was like a very intensive group experience. And back then it was clear that the group is only as strong as the weakest element. And so at some points I just really had to throw men out, because it wasn't often that happened, but on a couple of occasions it happened. And so as the training evolved, I created a place on the map that I called the path of the place of no return, the point of no return. And so if a man hadn't done all of the prep work before he went across there, he would have to leave the training. And so, yeah, that was the most challenging.
And when did you hear of Dr. Moore's death?
I think that was pretty soon after it happened. I guess it was 2016 that he died. We can get back to the sequence that you presented at the beginning of the call now. What I did was, I remember I was in the boat of one of the leads on the training, Carl Otto Sandvik, in Denmark. And we heard of it, and we made this little video where we commented on the surprise that we felt. This was just shocking to anyone, I think, but I was certainly shocked. He was shocked. And so we just put it out there on the internet. And that's how Robin Moore's niece found us, because she was obsessively trying to clear his name. And she found our video on the Reclaiming the Throne website, and she wrote a message there. And so she was the one who initiated the whole process, and she was the one who had all of these concerns about occult phenomena playing out in the house and everything. So that wasn't my judgment, that was her judgment early on. And then I came in to help her elucidate and clarify and communicate the story to the world.
Yeah, so the story that we heard online is one where an older man decides to willfully depart together with his spouse, who does the
Correct.
exact same thing. And they shoot themselves in the head, or he shoots her, and the story was pretty gruesome. They shoot themselves in the head, essentially.
It was presented as a murder-suicide.
Murder.
So
yeah, fair enough.
So the idea...
Yes.
The idea was that Robin Moore had vascular dementia, and so he had a momentary fit of psychosis that had him shoot his wife and then shoot himself in the head.
Yeah.
That was the story.
That was the story that they were trying to present, where an older man, great analyst, but suffering from a mental condition, shoots his wife on the head, and then out of shock, remorse, shoots himself in the head. And then there was a mention of a suicide pact in the smaller prints. But you're doubting both of these accounts, correct?
I didn't have much of a mental processing that I would describe as doubt. It just didn't sit well at the level of my gut, So I'm a very instinctual person. A lot of people think I'm a very intellectual person, but actually I'm very instinctual. And so whenever there's something that feels off at the level of instinct, I feel I don't feel good about it. And so there was this period where I was taken out a bit, because this was basically the founding father of my lineage, as far as I was concerned. I mean, you could say that maybe that was Jung, and Robert Moore was just an important element of that lineage. But for me, Robert Moore was more important. I always found Jung to be really opaque in his writing. I didn't find him to be very, very accessible. Robert Moore was very accessible. It was a lot easier to understand him.
He
So
feels, yeah, like he's speaking out loud all the time, like he's writing as he's thinking.
Jung,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like stream of consciousness. I find it really difficult to penetrate his writing. So it didn't sit right with me. And then, Marina reached out, and I had a bit of a back and forth with her. And now it sat even worse with me, because it was something that felt really, really off. And I mean, it wasn't just instinct anymore. She shared with me the forensics report, which decisively and objectively undermined the narrative. It was very clear that what was told, what was the official story, was not what actually happened, because the entry wounds and the point of gunpowder residue didn't fit with the story. He couldn't physically have shot himself based on where the
Yes, and where the
wound
bullet entered.
was.
Yeah.
Correct. So of course he didn't shoot himself.
Mm.
So then I was in this place where I'm like, okay, do I want to get involved in what feels like opening Pandora's box? And I took a while to decide that that was for me to do. I think it took a good 4 or 5 years before we had that
Wow.
initial conversation. Yeah, yeah,
Mm. It's a very good thing you did. And it's one of the reasons that I'm mentioning him, because, yeah, I'd like to honor him and help clear his name, but honor him for sure, because he's someone that, the likes of Jordan Peterson are everywhere. And I think a man whose work was even deeper in many ways is nowhere. And all people can find if they Google him is this tragic end. So it's good to start from the end and
yeah,
beginning. So please.
yeah. No, I think it was really important for. I mean, having had the help of a decade to gather testimonies and stories from people around the world, it was obviously important that Marina and I had that clarifying conversation online.
Yeah,
Because
it's no,
yeah,
please.
even today, people share stories such as, "Oh, I discovered his work and the way that he supposedly killed his wife and himself on
Exactly.
the same
Stands
day,
for everything.
and that harmed my appreciation for his work." And then, thankfully, I discovered this video, so now his legacy isn't tarnished in the same way. And I think that is really important, because the while I've taken some personal, how would I put this? I've gone a few rounds with myself where I stand in terms of his work at this point. But I do think that there's tremendous value in what he brought. And if it's not clear that the story that essentially makes it seem like a man who was so wise ends his days as a psychotic murderer, which
Yes.
obviously indicates that the quality of his work isn't so good after all.
Yeah. If he
You
can't
know,
help himself, how can he help others, kind of thing, right?
exactly. So it's like a recursive, or like a retroactively tarnishing his whole body of work. So
I
like all of the
actually
way
had
back.
I actually had a person, I hope is going to listen to this actually. And I don't remember whether I looked him up or he looked me up. Anyway, we came in contact, exchanged some emails. I invited him to come to the show because he was a
Yeah,
student. He was part of this group, so he knew Robert Moore personally and intimately. He knew James Hillman, other philosopher, I would call him, who I've mentioned in a few videos, and I'm going to keep on mentioning because I find his work
Rob,
fascinating.
is it Robert Johnson you're talking about?
James, the person who came in contact, I don't remember.
No.
I'll need to look it up.
Okay.
But basically, he had a very negative opinion of all these people because I wanted to bring him on board and have a discussion the way I have a discussion with you
Yeah.
about these people and about this work. And he said, forget it, they're all, what good is their work? Look at how Robert Moore ended, he murdered his wife. Like, so he, who knew him personally, almost canceled the whole edifice that Robert Moore
Right.
built because of this event.
Well, that says something about the importance of actually bringing the truth to the
Exactly.
public's attention.
And
Yeah.
speaking about the truth, something else came out when you were interviewing his niece, which is the
Yes.
his wife, who I only knew by name, perhaps a photograph I could find in Google. Looks like a very sweet, kind of middle-aged woman. But
Yeah.
what uncovered is that she had a very dark aspect to her, right?
Yes. Yes. That was very clear, and that was in part the reason why I was wary to cover the details that I did in the second conversation with Marina. Because it's all well and good to go through forensics reports, but to start speculating about occult phenomena and demonic presence and her Wiccan associations and things like that, that was an entirely different story altogether. And Yeah, it's a weird story to say the least. I don't know how much detail should we go into.
I think we should go into it a little bit because it would be a shame just to leave it hanging there for people listening.
Okay, so I think I can't do anything but speculate here as I try to give an account of what happened, because there are parts of this that are speculative. The um, the story is that Robert Moore, he married Margaret Shanahan. I think it was in the early 90s. I'm not entirely sure. At that point, Margaret, a strong personality, according to Marina. She came in. She was very different. She was clearly as into a more sort of secret society, occult level spirituality. She liked to adorn herself with snake symbolism, wore the Ouroboros around her arm on the during the wedding ceremony. These being more, Christians, they were wondering, what is this woman that is dancing around with bare feet, footed in the grass? And they were wondering a little bit from their more conservative, you can say, traditional background, and they were concerned. And As Marina would be the first to admit, there's nothing wrong with being barefooted, but there was something that didn't sit well with them, and gradually, this woman started to influence Robert in such a fashion that the family at large had less access to him, because Margaret didn't want Robert to spend time with his family. Robert Moore, he didn't want Robert Moore to spend time with his family. And there were Robert Moore started to have secrets about his wife that he didn't want his niece to inquire into. This was completely unprecedented in her relationship with him. So there were places that Dr. Moore would say, "Don't ask her about this. Important, don't ask her about this." And so it was clear that all of a sudden there was this layer of secrecy in the marriage. And Margaret, she wanted a particular house in Hyde Park in Chicago. It's a huge house, apparently, a bit of a spooky house. And so she worked Robert to cash in on some of his inheritance, some land, to get money to buy this huge house, which is behind tall walls, barbed wire, cameras,
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Barbed
And
wire, because it's not a dangerous area.
Yeah, Chicago is rough. I'm not sure if the barbed wire is
Yeah.
a. but it was
Specific.
a tall
Yeah.
wall with surveillance.
Okay. Okay.
It
Okay.
was. She describes it as a fortress,
But
essentially.
was that uncommon to the area? Because I know if this were in South Africa and some places in Johannesburg, it would be perfectly normal. Is this normal in Chicago?
We didn't speak about the rest of the houses in the neighborhood, so I don't really know.
Because it would be
Um,
interesting to know whether it's uncommon, or whether they had something specific to hide, or they were just a standard way of protecting yourself from that rough community.
I don't know. This Hyde Park area was a better area, but it's close to a worse area. And Chicago is, to my knowledge, the crime capital and murder capital of the United States. And so there's just like epidemic levels of crime there, with like shootings pretty much every day. So I think they take their security very seriously. So yeah, she would have it that friends start talking about Robert Moore start to change a bit. She talks about that happening even in his younger years, when he was doing field research on cults and joining cults in California and things like that, out of curiosity. But the thing that Marina shares is that this house is really quite spooky, and that this is kind of a labyrinth of a house, which is
I
so
remember she
huge.
was saying it was a weird house. The vibe was weird.
Yeah, and when you've been in a house that has a bad vibe, what that feels like. It
Absolutely,
kind of,
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, it sends
Houses,
shivers up your spine,
houses have even stronger vibes than people.
certainly. And I'm very sensitive to the
Yeah, me too.
energetics of a home.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that is interesting, and there are secret compartments in the floors, and I guess also in the walls, and
Secret compartments. Wow.
yes, yes. So it's kind of, it's odd, this, it's odd. You wouldn't say that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just, shall we say, eccentric to a rather high degree. Um, and my understanding is that this was Marina's doing, but I don't know this for a fact.
Not Marina's. His wife's doing.
Sorry, I mean Margaret Shannon,
Margaret's
yeah,
doing. Yeah.
his wife, yeah,
And it's
I missed
interesting
the name.
because it's such a common pattern among men. Like you've talked about your journey in dating, and I can relate to that. I had my own stint there,
Yeah,
and it's a very common pattern
yeah,
of a somewhat weaker, perhaps man, to be isolated by a woman. It's very common. I see it. Like I can count names pop into my mind as we speak. Obviously, not worth mentioning, but it's a very common pattern where one of your mates is going to meet a woman and then starts not showing up, not picking up the phone. Whenever you
yeah.
find him, he sounds like he's a bit off. He's a bit like doesn't.
It's different.
He's
Hmm.
different, almost like he doesn't know you
Yeah,
as well as before. And it's like her influence, but it's his weakness as well. So it's
yeah,
very interesting that it's this ailment, if you will, that Robert Moore would set out to cure in other men that he also suffered in such a hyperbolic degree, right?
yeah. No, and I think that is the pattern, actually. When you become so fascinated by the liminal experience and the numinous territories of the psyche, then less you are careful to ground yourself deeply in everyday matters. And for instance, having children is a perfect antidote to
Mm,
these
mm,
things.
mm.
And Robert Moore was not he was not a father, so
No, no, no.
just that's
Do
something to be
we
aware
know
of.
why? Because he spoke so much about fatherhood.
I have no idea. No, I don't know. I would imagine that Margaret didn't want to have children. But it's I think you get to this place where liminality can become chronic, and so you never fully emerge back into Utonian secular world, and so you're always in this liminal in between space. And in that place, you're always chasing dragons and exercising demons and things like that. And this is when a magician is overdeveloped at the expense of underdeveloped.
Exactly. It's worth mentioning, honoring this man's teaching, perhaps, that, like you said, these images are very medieval: the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover. And they work by way of images. Like imaging them is a great way of approaching them. And the image of a magician is like Saruman, perhaps, in the Lord of the Rings. He's in this high castle, he's alone, he's with his toys, essentially, with his books, with his knowledge, with his powers, but he's isolated. And the darker aspects of the magician, if you are dominated, like I was a magician, still am to some degree, is to become isolated from your environment.
Absolutely.
So I think that is a big danger for magicians out there. And like you said, I totally agree.
And I think that Tolkien's three main magicians are actually very good metaphors for what we're talking about.
Yes.
So you have the high tower magician, which is Saruman, and he becomes so dissociated from the earthly realm that he starts to pervert it and starts to do basically genetic manipulation of orcs to create the Urukai.
Without realizing it. He slowly steers away from the righteous path without even realizing it.
Exactly. And then you have in The Hobbit Radagast, who is this absolutely kooky character who is like fully in with nature the animals and
brown magician.
Yeah, and then you have Gandalf, who's very clearly representing the healthy and integrated magician, who then becomes the natural advisor for the king. That's how it's always been set up in the sort of the perfect like royal court, mythological royal court. But the thing with Saruman, as you bring him up, is that he gets seduced by the powers that he wields, which in his particular case obviously involves also technology, because Isengard becomes kind of a symbol of the industrial age inside of Middle Earth. And so he becomes drunk on the power of being able to meddle with nature. And if you translate that to what's happening with the technocratic transhumanist push today, you can very clearly see the same dynamic, which is that
Absolutely.
Here you have what it. Yeah. And in my estimation, when I look at these people, I see weak men. But thanks to their willingness to be corrupted at the level of psyche and soul, and their willingness to use technology as an artificial enhancer of their own lacking power, they can actually be, it's kind of, it's the revenge of the nerds, if you will. These are the men who never integrated their warrior, but now, since technology can actually bypass the warrior altogether, by warping reality, you can actually get strong men to kill themselves if you get them to subscribe to a false reality.
Wow. Yes. I love the angle you're taking, an archetypal analysis of our present situation. Yes. Hello, everyone. I would like to take a moment to let you know about a demo app we have created to showcase the concept of our ancient Greece revisited AI project.
We would like you to try it out and send us feedback, which we'll evaluate to decide if it's a project worth pursuing or not. The app is a demo of features and logic, but it doesn't have any trained models or AI frameworks built into it. It uses generic LLMs. We would like to hear your feedback on the general approach of the project and not the actual results, at this stage at least. So, try it out, and thank you very much.
I had a video on my channel, which was a question. I opened up a question, which is, who is the god that is ruling over us? And I
Yeah.
explained roughly what I meant by God, and it was very close to what we're talking about as in archetypes. Like perhaps
Right.
someone like
Yes.
Jung or Robert Moore would recognize the way I define a god as an archetype. It's something that you get drawn into, like a planet, like a comet to a planet. You
Correct. Yeah.
fall into the lover, you fall into the magician, and you're dominated by its gravitational force. And the question was, who is the god that is ruling our era? So I gave an example. I said in the 1960s, the ruling god was Dionysus. And it's understand Dionysus full 360 circle, which not many people understand, because they see the happy Dionysus, they see the ecstatic, the sexual Dionysus, the Dionysus
Yes.
drives us into ecstasy, but they don't see the destructive aspect of that. And this
Yeah. The
Eurip-
Dionysian orgies, they were they were pretty horrific as far as
someone said
I
it very well.
understand.
He said, "What people don't understand is that Dionysiac ecstasy is always the precursor to ritual sacrifice. It's the first step, and the last step is the ritual sacrifice. The god gets sacrificed, but you get sacrificed as well. So something like the backfire, which is a tragedy by Euripides, exemplifies this perfectly. The 360. And I think what we lived through in the 1960s, we lived the ecstatic part right at the moment of Woodstock, and literally the drugs that were being used there were the Dionysiac drugs, the psychedelics. Psychedelics are Dionysiac drugs, and some people might say, but Dionysus was a god of wine. Well, another rabbit hole about what this wine was and how it might have been a psychedelic wine, different rabbit hole. But suffice to say that
Yeah.
psychedelics I consider them to be. But then we had the slow burn of, the other Robert that you mentioned, who is Robert Bly, who is an American poet and a friend of Robert Moore's, and they had lectures together. And Robert Bly captures what I'm about to say perfectly. He said, how could what started as the ecstasy or the rock and roll of the 1960s. Sorry, there was disruption. What started as the rock and roll of the 60s, ending in the grunge scene of Seattle in the 90s, which Robert Bly described as a pure worship of the death instinct. It's like from
Right.
to Thanatos. And it's wondrous how so many people of that scene committed suicide. Kurt Cobain, obviously, being
Hmm.
one of the most famous. Um, I think someone from Alice in Chains, which was another band, but it's almost like all these people had a death wish that followed them through. Chris Cornell committed suicide in his 50s, decades after he was out of this scene. It's almost like you owe something to Dionysus. Once you taste his wine, you owe him your life. You're bound
Hmm.
to his orbit, which is not only the happy part. There's another sacrificial, destructive, dark aspect part. And the
Oh yeah.
question, what the question that I opened up is, who is the god that's ruling over us? And I got a long list, people responding, almost like picking from Greek mythology. So I think it's Ares because there's so many wars happening indeed, and right now as we speak, right? So yes, someone said Athena because Hermes came up a lot, and another figure which I'd love to discuss with you, which is Ahriman. Okay, now Ahriman
Yeah. Yeah.
it was mentioned enough in the comments in the response to my question, who is the god that is ruling over us, Ahriman. And I thought initially they meant the Zoroastrian deity of darkness, as in Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, the light and the darkness, and the Zoroastrian pantheon. But they actually meant a variation of that, which came from the
Yeah,
words of a mystic,
Steiner.
Steiner, who used this Ahriman, essentially responding to my question many years before it was being asked, who is the god? He said, our age, this technological, techno-feudalistic age, is the age of Ahriman, right? So how do we understand that? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, you and I, we come from slightly different backgrounds. You're deeply immersed in the Greek and in Greek antiquity and the associated pantheon, and I really love that as a child. Though, when it comes to deities, I think it is first of all important, and I wouldn't have said this just 5 years ago, but I think it's important to realize that the deities are actually real. They're not. It's not wise to take them to be mere symbolic representations, because if they were, people wouldn't worship them. So there are contracts you can enter into with these deities by worshiping at their altars, and each individual deity requires a different sacrifice. And so you see the sacrifices that Yahweh require in the Old Testament, and you see the sacrifices of the various other deities, the lesser deities that are described in the Old Testament, what kind of sacrifices they require. So, for instance, Moloch, who's one of the Middle Eastern deities described in the Old Testament, he preferred babies, and so the Jews, as described in Scripture, they would regularly turn away from Yahweh and start sacrificing their children to Moloch, because of course there were benefits. And then Yahweh came and rebuked them and sent them into hardship, and so there's this cycle. You have you have Baal, you have Baphomet, you have all of these, and I think actually they all have their followers. That's my understanding.
But
Ahriman
I was mentioned as a metaphor for our age. So
for technology, and Steiner's work paints this polarity that is mediated by Christ, where
it's a very strange universe he paints. He says that the ancient world was dominated by Lucifer, who is again not necessarily the Lucifer that we find in the Gospels. It's a different Lucifer who brings everything from ancient Greece and Rome to Babylon. It's a Luciferian somehow. And then now it's Ahrimanic, and between the two is the figure of Christ, which again is not necessarily the Christ of the Christian Gospels.
I feel that there are differences for sure, because even though I'm not deeply versed in Steinerian anthroposophic ideas, my understanding is that he sees Jesus as some sort of sun god, like a solar deity or a solar angel that incarnates on the planet, which is in large part similar to the view that the Theosophical Society have of Lucifer, which who they consider to be I think the idea is that he's an angel originating on Venus, the morning star, and that sacrifices himself for humanity in order to give humanity free will to, in a way, I suppose, liberate ourselves from the tyranny of God or something like that. That inside of the yeah, because you could understand this at a mythic or symbolic level.
Yeah, I can understand.
the Garden of Eden is a place with perfect harmony and intimacy with God, but there is no free will. So the idea is that you need to have free will in order to not live under the rule of a tyrant. And
Mhm.
I think this is fairly well representing the views of the Theosophical Society, but I may be a little off. But the point being with Steiner, of course, is that he has this eras of humanity where the Luciferian era starts 3000 BC, and that all of
Yeah, he
the
gives out dates. Yeah.
yeah, something like that.
Mm.
And then that all of the mystical traditions that we know in today's world are seeded by this very powerful esoteric teacher of universal principles,
It's not
Lucifer.
clear whether it's a man or a deity or something. I think
Yeah,
Steiner describing them more like enlightened masters of some sort, right? So this Lucifer of his is closer to the Buddha than to the devil, so to speak, right?
yeah, it seems that way. It
Yeah,
really
it seems
does.
that way. But I think he just typified, he captured something of the spirit of the times, which was where I was going with this question. So, however you call our age, whether Ahrimanic or something, there is something particular. Like I think, and it's worth going into this a little bit.
Yeah,
Many,
I think it's
perhaps,
very worthwhile.
absolutely, many of us listening, we feel there's something major happening right now
Hmm.
as we're speaking.
Yes, yes.
And the surface level of which was perhaps COVID, certainly AI, most probably the various wars that are coming up,
Mm,
and if all other strange, you know, that surrealness that started with COVID and keeps on
mhm.
growing bigger. So there's something holding it. There's a center there. Um, and it started from COVID, and I'm very happy to be speaking with someone who shares my views roughly on COVID because I
Yeah,
could not believe this thing was for real. And I know that I can only make enemies by mentioning it again. But like you said, you're very instinctual, you feel things. I felt there was something off from the very
yeah,
get, you know.
yes.
How did that affect you in your understanding of reality?
Hmm. Okay, so there are two lines of inquiry. Let's start with how it affected my understanding of reality and then weave it into the Steinerian ideas. And maybe if we have time to bring in a little bit of the more Christian ideas as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
was that for the end.
awesome. Yeah, for me, I had a night. This is very personal, but I might as well just share it. In the beginning of the pandemic, I didn't immediately have my feelers out that something was off. Um, Many of my friends did, but I didn't. I made some videos about the archetypal um, phenomena of conspiracy theory. It became quite popular. I was just describing the idea that being a conspiracy theorist is being in relationship to the shadow tyrant. So you perceive this omnipotent shadow tyrant because you haven't yet integrated your own sovereignty, and so you sort of externalize that. And then gradually, while the principles are sound, gradually I had the sneaking suspicions that my epistemic frameworks, they weren't actually up to the task anymore. Like everything that I had conceptualized over the past 10, 15 years of working with men and archetypes and even reviewing these movies, I couldn't fit it with what was manifesting in the world. And that was deeply troubling. Like it became an existential crisis because I was the guy that felt like I always had like a a sound take on phenomena. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I don't believe in what I said in this popular video anymore. There's more to it. And I gradually find myself in this like professional and somewhat of a spiritual crisis, where I realize that in order to actually be true to my moral compass and my instinct for truth, I actually need to abandon the platform that I've built.
Oh, wow. So this was the
And
moment.
yeah, I came to the place where a lot of my allies in the work were just, in my perception, becoming programmed with totalitarian obedience, slave programming. And I was like, horrified. What are you doing? Like, you're not the person I thought you were if this is what you stand for in a moment where it matters.
Yeah.
You're talking about sovereignty for 10, 15 years, and the moment there's a slight health scare, you're like, oh yeah, you're
You give it all away.
bodily autonomy. Like, throw that out the
Yes,
window.
yes, yes,
Let's
yes,
inject.
yeah,
You know, it's like,
yeah,
who are you?
yeah, yeah. I
Like,
felt that frustration, not relating to like men's work like you did, but relating to other like intellectual currents. I had friends who were and
yeah,
still are supposedly on the left, and they've read the whole edifice of Karl Marx and revolutionary Marxism. And I had friends who were libertarians, and they introduced
right.
me to to Friedrich Hayek. And they both went for it, and they were both, nothing to see here, just keep on your mask, get shut down, we don't know what this is. uh, Listen to, like, here in Greece, perhaps you might not know, but you had to um, send a text message to the authorities every time you went out of your house, for real. And you had six options, if I remember correctly, none of which was, I'm just going out for fun. It was, I'm going out to buy groceries, medicine, attend, and there was one that was for exercise. And because for older people, walking is an exercise. That was your trump card. You could say, I'm going out for exercise, and just go on for a stroll.
Yeah,
But they would check. They would check. And that is another thing that I found very suspicious, of how well the state functioned. Because I come from a country where for decades we've been complaining of how chaotic the state is, how underfunded, or sometimes overfunded, but underworked our resources are. Like, the state here in Greece is notoriously slow, technologically backwards, full of people who are not very interested in working. And all of a sudden, I saw like
it's crazy.
police bikes, boom, going past, like people actually stopping me in the street saying, "Can I see your number?" Checking in with some online cloud database and confirming that I actually sent the message. It was like, where were you when my mother was being taking her bag off from like an idiot like biker having her bike
Yeah.
stolen, and it took 30 hours to find someone on the phone. Where were you then? And now you're like RoboCop.
All, yeah. All of a sudden, there was unlimited resources
All of a
to
sudden.
sustain this authoritarian system when the
Exactly.
rest of the time they can't even keep a school open. It's like,
Exactly. It's like it's
yeah,
all a play. It's all intentional.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And towards the in the beginning stages of the pandemic, my father-in-law, he fell ill with cancer, and he died very fast. And my wife is from Hong Kong, and so she had to travel to Hong Kong. And every time she did, she had to listen. She had to spend 3 weeks in a hotel room before she was allowed to engage with her family. And in the midst of all of this madness, I came to this dark place where, like, I don't know that I'm going to see her again. I don't know where this is going. And it was just before Christmas 2020, and I was laying there in my bed, and all of a sudden, it's like the gateways of revelation just opened wide, and I saw clearly like the demonic foundations of what was playing out in the world, and I was shitting myself. I was not prepared for that at all. I've grown up in an academic family. I've done everything that I can up until this point, finding a reasonably well, researched or sourced
Rational.
theory, or
Yeah.
if somebody criticizes me for this, like, here's the whatever the source. And now all of a sudden I hear like people are asking me for their source to prove common sense, and I'm like, are you mad? Like, are you mad? Like, what is going on? And so that's when I just started to realize this is something I have never experienced before.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is a spiritual component to what is going on, and I feel it viscerally as demonic. What the heck? Yeah.
This is where I think that new God was being born, which is where I was getting with my question in this video. There's definitely something happened.
Right.
Definitely something happened that was prepared, as all things are, perhaps starting from, who knows, 2008,
Fascinating.
global financial crisis, but something changed. And
Yeah.
you know what? Everyone felt it. It's not just
Yes.
us spiritual, like crazies. Everyone felt it. And I'm going to tell you, like, just segueing off a little on the subject. I was speaking with my wife actually, because I was living abroad for the good part of the decade following the global financial crisis of 2008, which hit Greece very hard. And
Yeah.
I was away, and thankfully I kind of missed the worst aspect, because there was, together with the financial depression, there was a very physical depression which you could feel if you walked around Athens in
Mm.
2013, 14, 15, 16. And my wife was here, and she was describing to me how it was. And I realized she was speaking the past tense. And I was like, what do you think happened? And all this went away. And she said, COVID. And I was like, and this was when I met her, and I was like, interesting. And she said, yeah, because once we came out of this, we came out like changed, like new people with a new outlook in life. She said, literally. I was like, fascinating, because you are right. Uh, People did change, and they did change in a weird way. I mean,
I see where you're going with this.
they definitely changed in certain negative aspects, became much more agitated. I think we've all experienced this. Um, Much more self-centered, but they actually came out with a more positive outlook in a strange way. At least here in Greece, they were like, "Yeah, let's do it." And if people are doubting what I'm saying, just look at how much people are spending now. For a good decade, people were very, the frugal is the word, with their money, and so prices were low. And then once they went, they just started spending like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah.
So there was a
Wow.
transfer.
I haven't thought about it that way, but this idea that a new god was born, and I suppose
Yeah,
then that would be Ahriman or Ahriman, as you pronounce it.
Astronaut is as good
Uh,
as any,
yeah,
in that Steiner
yeah.
kind of context. Yeah.
Well, Steiner was famous or infamous, depending on how you see it, for prophesying at the beginning of the 20th century that there would be a time in the future where the dark forces of the world would succeed in separating the human from the soul by giving them a vaccine to sever their connection with God.
Was it something he
So,
actually said?
yes, absolutely, he said that,
What?
and
I didn't know that.
no, he said that's a famous Steiner quote. And well, you have me as a guest now, so you can't take it back. I listened. I've been listening a bit to Thomas Meyer, who's a German anthroposophist that has been doing research on people who took the vaccine, and he's seeing the signs of what Steiner was talking about in their etheric body, and that there needs serious work needs to be done in order to re-anchor their soul back in their body, because there's a severing process happening through what he determines to be actual vaccine beings that are in the vaccine, that are actually like parasites that are working to split the human from the soul. Now that sounds crazy, perhaps, but if it's interesting to you, look him up. Thomas Meyer. He wrote a book
I'll
about it.
definitely yeah, yeah.
So if you're vaccinated, maybe that would scare the heebie-jeebies out of you right now, and you would reject it out of hand. But I would trust that there are forces that exist that can heal, and I think that force happens to be God. But nevertheless, I think this idea of okay, so Ahriman, which represents the merging of humans with the technological realm, and then you have Lucifer, who represents the dissociative impulse into imaginal realms, false light, the metaverse, whatever it might be. If you look at these two, whoever Steiner was and however valid his, take on Jesus is, I think he does present a very compelling spectrum that actually isn't so much opposed as it's mutually enhancing, so that basically the image we were given of the Matrix in the famous movies is the merging of Ahriman and Lucifer, where the Ahrimanic impulse is the plugging in of the human in these pods where they become batteries for the machine. And then the Luciferian impulse is the false reality that they are fed through the metaverse in order to make them happy and compliant.
Yeah, because I always like, one of the things that I'm seeing is this surreal reality created by AI, which is especially in the realm of images. It's quite astonishing what it can do. These deep fakes, you can only understand them by the context. If you have Barack Obama talking about, I don't know, the size of his genitals, you go, okay, it's probably a deep fake. But you can't really tell if you're honest with yourself. It's just the context. And it's just going to get more and more and more, um, until you don't know what is real anymore. And I keep being reminded of, Dante's Inferno, where it's a very interesting book, for apart from its greatness as a piece of poetry, because you get to see the Christian world of his time as it stood. Dante, the poet, descends into Inferno, that is presented as an arena almost of concentric rings. And each ring represents a human failing, a sin, and a punishment accordingly. And the people who live in this ring are the people who committed this sin, gluttony or hate, and so as he descends into these rings, you get to see the hierarchy of sin for Dante, for the Christian, the Catholic of his time. What is the hierarchy of sin? Today, if you were to give people to create this hierarchy, perhaps they would say racism at the top, misogyny, racism at the top. But obviously, this is not Dante's hierarchy. Even murder is somewhere in between. It's not like it's not the worst thing you can do, strangely enough. And as you go deeper into hell and into the more serious crimes, you get a sense that it's falsehood. It's a sense of falsehood or false reality that is the gravest of sins, which is why you have someone like Odysseus, being there, very close to the devil. He's a sinner worse than some others because he was the man of many ways. He was the trickster. He was the con artist of, let's say. So for Dante, this is very deep. The Prophet Muhammad is very deep in hell, according to Dante, because for Dante, Muhammad did not create a new religion. He perverted the Christian religion. For Dante and for others of his days, Islam is a sect of Christianity as well. So he's very much, which is very troubling for a Muslim to read this great work of poetry, Inferno. But devil is the con artist, per excellence, if you
Yes.
will, the person
Yeah.
who replaces truth with a semblance of the truth. That is the
Yes.
power of hell for Dante. We have to remember,
Yeah.
right? And that's
Very
what.
good. Yeah, I haven't. I'm glad. Thank you for the synopsis. I have not yet read that one, but hopefully I will one day. That makes a lot of sense. And I do think that it's that particular impulse that is basically ruling the planet right now. And one of the things that I see is, like, if we talk about the sort of the tricks of the devil, it's like it's deception, division, I would say drama, death, things like that. And the deception would be probably at the top of my list as well, because of the very thing that we talked about previously, that if you deceive a warrior, a strong man, in a really masterful way, he would kill himself and think it's a good thing. And a lot of the time, that's what happens when people go to war. They're sent to war not because they're defending their country or because they are defending democracy or some high virtue. They're actually sent to war because the war is serving a bigger agenda that has nothing to do with the people. And it's very interesting. Again, rabbit holes all over here, but it's very interesting to see how, for instance, World War III may fit into what seems to be a pretty clear roadmap for how to change society. And so, okay, so can we create World War III? Okay, that makes it really easy to start triggering terrorist activities and cyber pandemics and famines. And I don't want to sound too doom and gloom, but
No,
if you
after COVID, everything's possible, is what I say.
exactly. And so the point being is that if you look at this realm as a place where there are different deities operating, and in the Christian world it would be Satan primarily, but there are also many lesser deities, then a very central Christian idea is that humanity is fallen. And so you would assume then that human systems, the more human they become, the more corrupt they become, if they become unmoored from the sort of the divine blueprint given to us by God. And so that's what we're doing more and more. We're trying to move as far away from God as possible. And then we call it virtuous and democratic and human rights and all of these things. But that is, in my perception, a Luciferian imagination. That is that matrix that we're being given as our bodies objectively are suffering, and the world around us is getting worse and worse. So if you, for instance, you're dying of starvation, but you have a Luciferian dream that's saying that that's noble, then you could be happily doing so, right? And so in the Ahrimanic dimension, your body is, I don't know, maybe in some level being harvested, and then in the realm of the Luciferic dimension, you're happy about it. And I think that's what's so frightening about the world today: the level of delight that people take in becoming totalitarian followers.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
and
Yes.
and what deity is that? That is the interesting question.
Yeah. But speaking of deities, you in a personal conversation and showing up very strongly in what you've been saying, have returned to Jesus Christ in your own personal journey. So how was
Yeah.
that transition from Jungian medieval mythicist to what you had in front of you, in a way, right? Which is Jesus.
Yeah, still deciphering that one for myself. Though I wouldn't say that my journey was the classical salvation born again path. It was more a process of deduction. Like, if this is true, that the world that I'm observing is actually real, and as far as I can tell, that it's objectively real, then this also has to be true, because what I see here seems satanic, and I'm enough of a believer in the balances of creation, the universe, yin yang, whatever, that if there is a powerful evil arising in the world, there must also be a powerful good. And so I'm practically reverse engineering myself into faith, because it seems to be the most rational thing to do for me. So it's very odd in terms, but I know that I'm not the only one who's gone down this path. But now that I'm here, I'm glad that I made this choice, and I'm being exposed to a whole new world after returning to a Christian metaphysics and uh, paradigm of spiritual warfare that makes more sense to me than anything else that I've ever been exposed to. And frankly, when I compare my significant time spent inside of Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism with a strong deal of emphasis on a works-based spirituality, you do a ton of prostrations, and you do things in the world that are considered good. And then gradually you can move towards enlightenment, and the thing that I'm discovering is that, well, I never found that my ego was challenged by that doctrine. I was very comfortable inside of that doctrine. I could actually even tell myself that I was quite special inside of that doctrine, because I had meditated a lot. I had been on pilgrimages to India and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, I came to this place where the ego's fascination with itself started to feel disgusting to me. And I'm like,
Ego's fascination with itself. Wow. That's definitely something to reflect on. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, this obsession with, like, okay, where are the little places I have not fully integrated myself? Where are the places where I need to tune my spiritual practice? What is the story of my life? What is my purpose? What is blah, 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 blah? And a lot of that was in reclaiming the throne. I was thinking to myself, man, this is pretty narcissistic.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to tell you one thing that I've noticed, and it's been pretty damn important for me. And it comes in a simple phrase that I picked up from somewhere. It says, the last place the ego hides is within itself. So, and that actually came from a film. But the idea is that people who are on this typically Eastern or more Eastern spiritual journey are in a graver danger than they think, because it's a very subtle difference between transcending the ego and the ego believing it has transcended itself.
Oh, I
And
don't even know that there is a difference.
and an ego that believes and has convinced itself that it has
Yeah.
with itself is the most dangerous thing, and you find
Yeah.
it. One thing that I had noticed, and I've been very vocal about it, is that people who are go into these meditative practices are
Yes.
very frequently becoming a worse and more deranged versions of themselves, while claiming
I know.
and one example is Sam Harris. I cannot help but
Yeah.
the man
Oh
who
man,
has seen,
that guy is so crazy.
yeah, through the veil of his own mind, is on the strongest Trump derangement syndrome that you've
He's so
seen.
crazy.
He's clearly deranged in his,
He's one of the most irrational
he's
influencers out there,
yeah,
and he
exactly.
thinks he's rational.
He's become one of the most irrational,
Yeah.
because initially
Yeah.
he's become one of the most irrational because all the while doing like 30 years of whatever transcendental meditation. And to that I'm going to just throw in something you said about rationality. You said you found it reasonable, and one thing that I want to put out there, and I'm going to do is definitely one or more episodes on that, is, we live in a culture that has been believing since a very long time ago that reason and faith are two opposing, hardly opposing forces. The more
Mm.
rational you become, the less you can believe in God. As a matter of fact, a
Yeah.
scientist who's
It's
also
a
a
false
believer.
binary.
Yeah, yeah. A scientist who's almost a believer is a contradiction to us. What is missed there, and it took a long time to figure out, is that there have been rationalists who approach God through rationalism. Of course, they have. The whole scholastic tradition of Europe is such a school. Centuries, you know, centuries have gone by where people have been using Aristotle's logic to not exactly prove. That's another trick of whether you can prove or disprove and what would that entail, but to bring you closer to God rather than further away. And it was in the
Yeah.
Enlightenment, which I used to see as again, like all good, all dancing, singing kind of era where reason
Yeah.
finally conquered ignorance and darkness. And now I'm like, okay, no, actually, these people did something
Yeah.
very strange. Like the theory of the Illuminati is not that far from historical reality. And what these enlighters, Descartes, Rousseau, the household names, what they will never tell you or they will imply is that they didn't necessarily have to fight against dogmatic medieval Christianity. They actually had to fight against other philosophers like themselves who used ancient Greek wisdom to bring people closer to God, while they wanted to use ancient Greek wisdom to pull people away. So essentially, you have a fight
Mm.
between two versions of two interpretations of ancient Greece. That is what
Yeah.
they're not telling you. What they're telling you is that there was the Middle Ages that were just based on one book, the Bible, and if you didn't believe, you were burned as a witch. And then people were like, no, there's other books. There's Plato and Aristotle, and we're going to read them again and bring forth. No, 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 no. It was actually two different versions. So reason came out
As well.
twisted from the Enlightenment. The reason,
Mm.
rationality that we have inherited is a perverted rationality that came out
Yeah.
of a struggle of a certain group of people against an establishment. And the fight led to the modern world. And it we are we are children of that revolution that we call the
Yeah.
Enlightenment. And
Yes.
as always, we're taught that we should not speak of the revolution, like in communist countries. You should worship the revolution, but you should not investigate the revolution. You should not remember what was the alternative.
Yeah. It. Yeah. I mean, now we're in that dangerous territory of historical revisionism that
Yes,
not
we are.
you're not supposed to deal with any of these things because then you're offending the very bedrock of our culture.
Exactly.
Well, a similar thing is happening with World War II now. I'm sure you've noticed that
I've noticed. Yeah.
mythos around World War II is starting to fall apart. And what are you going to do with that when you see, for instance, like a country like Germany that is supposed to be as anti-Nazi as possible these days? Only yesterday they had, or 2 days ago, they had a raid of 170 civilians that had posted critical information or critical posts about the government on social media. So there was like
Imagine
a,
that.
a,
Yeah.
an organized raid around the country where 170 dissidents
Wow.
were jailed because
Wow.
they didn't agree with the government. And now you're telling me that you're the most anti-Nazi country.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So people have become obsessed with aesthetic.
With aesthetics, yeah,
So
it's the
yeah,
swastika more than the actual authoritarianism.
yes. So they look at people like in, I don't know, boots and like uniforms that have a particular body language and
Yes.
intonation, and
Yes.
that is what the authoritarian
Exactly.
expression is.
And if you don't
But
look like that, then you're fine.
if you're
Yeah.
delightfully,
Yeah.
imprisoning people and manifesting tyranny, then I'm sure it's great. And
Yeah.
it's it's
Yeah.
it's insane to me that we're in this place where people can legitimately not recognize the rise of tyranny around them because the aesthetics that they have been indoctrinated into equating with tyranny don't match.
Perfectly said. Perfectly said. The aesthetics that have been indoctrinated with theory. Yeah. If it doesn't look like a Nazi, then it's fine.
So what does that look like to me? It looks like people have started to view reality through the lens of like a Hollywood production.
Absolutely.
And this is not a far-fetched idea. I'm actually literally just now writing a piece where I'm touching upon the fact that the CIA has been deep into Hollywood to 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 socially engineer the masses into a particular perception of reality. And when you become hyperstimulated emotionally enough times by watching particular narratives, you become quite highly conditioned to see the world in this way. And I see people these days who my perception of them is that they are like the heroes of their own narratives, and their heroic deed is to eat popcorn while watching people die in Ukraine.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
send in more soldiers. I love the show.
And like you just said about the totalitarianism of modern Germany,
Yeah,
Peter Hitchens, the brother of the late Christopher Hitchens, who's still around writing, actually wrote a piece about that thing you just said. In Britain,
yeah,
he said when the vote came in for the British Parliament to vote whether to send tanks to Ukraine, okay,
right.
they said there was not a single objection. But you'd think there'd be a single objection for everything, even if it's like, do we save this starving child or not? You'd expect someone to say no for whatever reason. It's a mark of health. And for this highly controversial decision, he said there wasn't even a voice raised. They said, we're going to send so many billions out of our budget. We're already in debt. We know that the government in Ukraine is just, if not more corrupt than the one in Russia. There's absolutely no way of winning this, but we're going to keep on sending money. And no one said, wait, wait, wait,
Yeah,
wait, not a single one. Peter Hitchens noted how there wasn't a single one. He said that is exactly like a Soviet parliament, you
yeah.
know?
But then again, that's when you realize that what's happening isn't unfolding in the secular world. This is about worship of a deity.
Mm, 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 mm. Yes.
So, and that may sound outrageous to some, but some of your viewers were talking about Aries, and there are also. I'm wondering now whether I should stop talking because of what I'm going to say is a bit crazy.
I'd urge you to
Um, I think war is a magical ritual
Yes.
that utilizes what you can call blood magic for an occult agenda.
Yeah. Yes, I understand perfectly what you're saying, and I think there's even variations of that because the philosopher and ultra right wing, as he called himself, Julius Evola, wrote a book about war being like a spiritual practice, but he mostly mentioned it in the context of the old Indo-European peoples, for whom war was a god. But now it's an actual it's it's a related principle because you can have the war described by Homer, which is that Indo-European ritual essentially, and you
Yeah.
can have this more mass sacrifice type of war.
Yes.
It's always again
Right.
very dangerous territory, but you made the first step. I
It's,
always used to say,
it's very dangerous territory.
yeah, I'm gonna get it
Controversial.
more dangerous. Where people, whenever people mention quote a certain ethno-religious group, they mean the Jews because they're the only currently which are both a nation and a religion being tantamount. So there's a similar thing that I've noticed whereby there's in their mythology, in their poetic imagination, there's a struggle with God, like a son with a father. It's this very strong thing where you find,
Yeah.
Abraham and Jacob, the sacrifice that Abraham was about to perform is actually called a holocaust, the burnt offering,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
holocaust is almost like there must be a holocaust in their radical imaginary. I would say there must be a holocaust before God grants them the kingdom of Israel.
Mm.
There's an unfolding of
Fascinating.
that reality as well. Yeah, so war,
I've been
holocaust.
follow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. This is we're really exploring taboo territory here now. But
Yeah.
I think it's important. I was listening to a woman that I love, a Nigerian minister, Apostle Isi Iginegba, Christian, and she starts every year with some sort of prophetic imagination of the coming year. And one of the things that she was talking about was that when God wants to raise a new generation of holy men and women to implement his plan on the planet, then the devil will always respond to that threat with genocide. And so she was expecting, because she is seeing new leaders rise in the church, she was expecting genocide on the planet.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that connects to another thing that was said personally, which is on the more encouraging side, where there was this Buddhist, actually Shaolin monk, who's the rounds of the internet now.
Yeah, I know him. Yeah.
And he said, because they were asking him on certain related topics, he said, I don't remember the question, but it was in the context of, we see a move towards the inhuman, the post-human, the transhuman.
Yeah.
And he said, the universe must always be in balance. So if you see an excess on one side, there must be an excess on the other side, which maybe you're not seeing. So if we're seeing an excess in this materialistic, inhuman, nihilistic view, apparently there must be a deposit gathering of a more human,
Yeah.
spiritual, transformational aspect as well, which can be tapped there, right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. We could keep going, but I don't know. We're at 2 hours. How are we?
You're in 2 hours, and it's better to have more than less content. But wrapping it up, I would love just to stay on the subject we opened just before about your faith in Jesus. Why do you think people find it so difficult to believe in Jesus today? And what is your perhaps recommendation to them?
Yeah. So I want to preface that with just stating that I'm as independent in Christianity as I am elsewhere, and so the way that I am Christian is not very traditional. But I have come to believe in Jesus as the Messiah. I do not believe in Jesus as God, but I believe in Jesus as the Messiah, which makes me a Unitarian, as we discussed a little yesterday. But I think that the greatest evidence that I have of Jesus being a living reality is how I experience him respond during times of spiritual warfare. And this is my experience. I am lucky enough to not have had any like cry out to Jesus moment because I'm so deep in suffering or demonic oppression that like I'm desperately reaching out for
Some
him.
people would call you unlucky for not having these moments.
Some people would. Yeah, some people would. And maybe they're right. So what I feel is, and even though I haven't had those most intense moments, bringing Jesus and the Holy Spirit into this family, which has started to happen over the last year or so, something starts to happen that I cannot explain, which is positive. And for instance, my wife, she had no interest in Jesus, but all of a sudden, he comes, and she starts wanting to read the Bible, and she starts, during moments of distress, she starts praying to him, and she feels relief. She feels like there's a living reality that actually impacts her day to day that she had no reason to turn to, really. Like there was nothing in her life that should indicate that, all of a sudden she should need Jesus, other than the fact that she has a husband that is talking a lot about what's happening in the world in ways that can put the fear of God into people. but things are just happening, and so I think it's just prayer has demonstrably worked in my life.
Okay.
And I feel also that I've been on a particular spiritual path now that for me, in a very personal way, I can see how I was always meant to go here. It's just a long story, but like the pieces, the sort of the autobiography of my life is very clearly pointing back to Jesus. And I just feel that reading scripture, even though I'm not a literalist when it comes to the Bible, but a lot of what is written there is a lot more literal than I was willing to admit just a few years ago, and that there is no other place I can go to make sense of what's happening to the world in the same level of detail. And this makes senseness. This is a metaphysics that actually clarifies the world as it's manifesting in front of me right now in a way that no other spiritual metaphysics actually does for me. And so that when I have it, it's matching my lived experience, what I observe in the world. Prayers are being answered. We are somehow. I feel that the more I call on Jesus, the more there is some level of protection. I cannot explain it in any other way. That there is a way in which I feel that the like people ask me like how do you manage to go this deep into what's happening in the world without like becoming psychologically destabilized or really unhappy and depressed. And if I were to answer that, it's like, yeah, I have Jesus on my team. I am happy. There's so much love in my family, and I don't take credit for that as a human. I think that's dysfunctional. Like
Yeah,
I have to give God some of the credit for the blessings of my life.
I think you answered it perfectly. So it's a good point to stop. It's been a wild
Hmm.
discussion.
Yeah, covered a
Yeah,
lot of territory.
because like with this god that was born during the pandemic, I always look for things being born in these discussions. If it's about saying what I've said 100 times, you saying what you've said 100 times, and just perhaps for people who have not heard us, is interesting. But I always want something new to be, and I think there was at least two moments there that I can discern that were like peaks, and something new was being said.
Nice,
It made me realize.
nice.
So yeah, I took what I was always looking for in these discussions. So thank you for that. And yeah, is there anything else you'd like to say about your work to people who might be listening, where they can find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I would be very happy to do that. I would like to say that based on the second interview or conversation that I had with Marina, Robert Moore's niece, um, I've decided to return to my work with the Reclaiming a Throne. But the training is going to be different because I no longer find that merely relating to archetypes is in integrity for me spiritually. And so I'm creating a training that will bridge, much like Robert Moore was trying to do at the end of his life, to bridge the archetypal work with a more Christian metaphysics. So I also work with men and also a bit more with women as well on their marriage and their relationship to the other sex, because that's a place where I've been particularly blessed in my marriage with Michelle. So I do one-on-one work there. Though, like the big thing I'm doing now is rebirthing Reclaiming a Throne in this new understanding and paradigm. Uh, so that would be innerthrone.com, even though that website isn't actually updated with all of the fresh, things that are happening for me. So I'm actually going on a bit of a pilgrimage in Norway this summer to prepare for this new training. And finally, I would like to mention that I also.
Like the Camino Santiago, is it a self-made pilgrimage or a well-known pilgrimage?
Well, there is a pilgrimage route in Norway because of the cathedral in Nidaros, which is Trondheim. There's a saint there, and it's quite one of the more popular pilgrimage routes in Europe. So people travel from all over Europe to walk it, and Reclaiming a Throne was born along that pilgrimage route in 2013, 14. So I need to revisit some of the locales that I went to back then in order to, you know, get right with where things are at. Uh, Finally, Michael, I'm working to create a platform for all of these men who are committed to their families and to building unbreakable families under God in this time, and creating this platform called the Armory, the Armory.app, where we come together to do prayer and strategic planning of our work and so on and so forth. So my work is quite wide. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to put all the links that you're going to send me below, and I'm sure we're going to have more of these discussions as the whatever is happening is unfolding. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed this. So I'm totally open for
Likewise.
that. I think
Likewise.
I have found somebody here that I can actually speak freely with, and it's not so often.
Yeah, me too. So thank you very much. And for people listening, we're definitely going to have more of these soon. So stay tuned.